Let me say a little bit before we go over the agenda. I always like to say just a little bit about an, the kind of the context in which we're meeting. Kind of there are what's what's the broad landscape. Um, and there are several aspects of 2025 that are really important to say, but let me also just acknowledge before we get into the specifics of the year, the passing of the wonderful Jimmy Carter. Um, and words fail. I know a lot of troublers volunteered at his service at the viewing, and he leaves a huge aching hole and was such a tremendous guiding light to have. And let me also say that in the antithesis of that, that very much this year, we are, of course, all operating against the backdrop of the Trump presidency. For those that are new to Necessary Trouble, we tend to keep our focus very local and very state focused because it's where we can make the greatest change and have the greatest leverage. Um, but much of what we do this year will certainly be shaped by that backdrop. So, in terms of Georgia, let's talk about 2025. Context for 2025. This Monday, the Georgia General Assembly, the state legislature, begins its session. This is actually the second year of a 2-year session. It begins January 13th, which is Monday. The last day will be April 3rd, and we'll be talking a whole lot about that during the next couple of months and doing a whole lot of work related to legislation that gets proposed. Just a reminder that subsequent to the 2024 elections in the state house, we currently have 80 Democrats and 100 Republicans. In the state Senate, we have 23 Democrats and we have 33 Republicans. Also taking place this year will be in June. There will be a primary, a special primary for the Public Service Commission. And those are going to be districts 2 and 3. And then in November, we will have municipal elections. So all elections that are city-based, city council, mayor, city board of educations, and so all those will happen in November. Those will be the municipal elections, and they will also be the Public Service Commission general special election. So all of that in November, and as Michelle Obama always says, and so do we, every year is an election year. So given that context, let me say a little bit about what our agenda for today looks like. We are really fortunate to be hearing from longtime troubler friend and political leader Daniel Blackman. Karen Davenport will be giving him a full introduction, but he has agreed to talk to us about 3 areas, and one is environmental justice and sustainability from a national perspective. And Karen can tell you more about his background, and that will make a lot of sense. He'll be talking about the Public Service Commission race this year, and he will also generally just be giving us his counsel about progressive work in Georgia in this environment. So he is a longtime friend of ours, and we are so happy to have him back with Necessary Trouble. And then the second part of the meeting, we'll be talking about troubler work. In 2025, we'll be describing kind of what the framework of the work is this year. And we will be also talking about work underway, which means we will be asking you guys to sign on for some pieces of work. So on that note, I'm going to turn it over to Karen Davenport to do an introduction of the wonderful Daniel Blackman.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Becky. Good afternoon, fellow troublers, friends, change makers, and guests. It is an honor to introduce someone who doesn't just talk about making a difference, he walks it. Daniel Blackman is a champion for environmental justice, a relentless advocate for economic equity, and a leader who turns big ideas into real world impact. But let me warn you, he's not your typical advocate. He has a penchant for making you rethink climate change while compelling you to advocate with him through his infectious smile. Daniel has spent his life ensuring that families, regardless of zip code or income, have access to clean air, safe water, and brighter futures. Whether it's fighting for renewable energy programs in undeserved communities or mentoring the next generation of leaders, he's proven that a better world is possible when we work together. And he's done it with a heart of passion and a fierce commitment to justice. One of his most inspiring traits is his ability to connect with people. Whether you're a young activist, a seasoned policymaker, or just someone trying to make sense of it all, Daniel makes you feel seen, heard, and ready to take action. When he's not busy changing the world, or at least Georgia, he's a dedicated family man who shows us all how to balance purpose with priorities. Let us give a warm welcome to the man who reminds us that justice and equity are not just ideals, they're action verbs. Please join me in welcoming the dynamic, inspiring, unstoppable Dan Blackman. Thank you.
Oh man, I got to take you on the road. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Well, I want to first say thank you. Let me see if I can switch. All right, I see a bunch of people in the room. First of all, thank you. It's such an honor to be here. Happy New Year. I couldn't have asked for a better welcome. But before I even start, I have to say thank you to this great organization. I would not have made the runoff in the Public Service Commission race in 2020 had it not been for many of you on this call, for your commitment, for your work, for the things that you all were able to do to help my race, which ultimately fell 14,000 votes short of becoming the first Democrat elected in Georgia in over 20 years. However, I ended up being appointed by President Biden to run the Environmental Protection Agency for the last 3.5 years. And I think that is a privilege and an honor within itself. So I want to personally say thank you to Becky Butler. Thank you to this organization. Thank you to so many people I see on this call that have meant a lot. And for those who are continuing in the legacy of Congressman John Lewis and so many others that are focused and committed to the progression of this state, especially as it relates to climate change, energy infrastructure, and so many other areas around equity and impact. So again, I want to just say thank you before I begin with my remarks. And I want to cover two or three things today. The first being a sense of optimism in the midst of so much chaos, and us knowing that on the birthday celebration nationally of Dr. King, we will inaugurate a gentleman who stands for everything except what Dr. King stood for. And we have to be not only resilient and vigilant during this time, but we have to continue to support each other like we never have. It's so critical and important at this moment for us to be able to build, not based off of anxiety, but to build off of organizing, to build off of what we hold true. My family immigrated here from Barbados. And my grandfather, for many of you that don't know, was a diplomat to the United Nations. And during his service, there were a series of sustainable goals that were set. One of them in which says that we are well able to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. So it is incumbent upon those of us on this call to make sure that we are being a beacon of light and hope for the next generation in the midst of so many challenges. We have to be resilient and we have to build based upon what we have established. Rather than going backwards, we must go forward more aggressively than we ever have. In fact, when I left the administration as the regional administrator in July of 2024, I did so to support President Biden in his reelection bid until a month and a half later when our Vice President Kamala Harris, who ran a stellar race, when she was asked to become the Democratic nominee. I, in turn, became a surrogate for her campaign, working throughout the southeastern United States and throughout the state of Georgia, focusing fundamentally on getting the vote out. We all know how the election turned out, not in the favor that many of us had worked for, and we are facing some very challenging times. So when I talk about being optimistic, and thank you again for that very kind introduction. She said an infectious smile. Sometimes, my smile and my level of excitement isn't because I don't know that there's a tremendous path ahead of us. It's just that when you've had the privilege and honor to serve with Congressman John Lewis, God bless his soul, and Reverend C.T. Vivian, Coretta Scott King. I'm very close to the King family, worked with the King family for several years. Harry Belafonte, individuals around the country that meant so much to the movement. It's very hard for me to know that if they were able in the 60s and in the 70s, and even well before, during the Jim Crow era, to be able to make it out of some of the hardest times in our country, then surely those of us on this call can find a path forward in the midst of turmoil, in the midst of a declining democracy, and in the midst of so much uncertainty. So again, thank you so much for the work you do. Second thing I want to cover is the obvious, the Public Service Commission. Why the Public Service Commission is important, which I don't think I need to go into. We all know that the 5-member commission of the Public Service Commission, all Republican, has for so long been somewhat of a thorn in the shoe of progress for so many individuals in the state of Georgia, ratepayers who are trying to keep their lights on, ratepayers in places like Albany, Georgia, Dougherty County, where individuals are still recovering from the vast and traumatic impact of COVID-19, individuals and organizations and institutions that have been impacted heavily and not able to recover. Here's what's most important about what most people don't talk about. While Metro Atlanta has done very well, while the film industry, has brought so much prosperity to Georgia, unfortunately, our brothers and sisters in Middle Georgia and South Georgia and North Georgia, around the state of Georgia, have been tremendously impacted in an irreparable way. Economic progress and prosperity has not flowed or trickled down into areas like Muskogee County, where I come, right next door, Harris County, which was massively affected. Energy and utility rates, especially when you have amongst the highest energy burden in the United States, these are counties and communities that are poised to benefit from the leadership, not just from myself, but from those of you on the call, from those of you that understand the impact of those 5 individuals that make decisions every day on people's race, that make decisions every day on if an individual can keep their lights on, or if they have to find ways to borrow money or find ways to cut their budget from getting groceries for their families, getting their own medication. Rural areas where many of you know that emergency services are too often not accessible because of a lack of broadband, because of a lack of communication in place that has failed under leadership because of the commitment and the overcommitment, I guess I should say, to energy projects that have cost the state of Georgia billions of dollars that could have gone into infrastructure, billions of dollars that can gone towards helping the over 2 million Georgians that live at or below the poverty line. And when you have an integrated resources plan that's coming up in the next couple of weeks for Georgia Power to determine how they are going to extend and invest into energy and energy infrastructure, I think it's all very, very important for us to understand what this means and what does our fight look like from now until the midterm elections and then beyond, when we have a second opportunity to get the right person in the Oval Office that can continue in the policies that were created and established during the Biden-Harris administration, specifically the bipartisan infrastructure law and the Inflation Reduction Act. Now, as a regional administrator, for many of you all that don't know, when I served as regional administrator under the Biden-Harris administration, that basically means that I was responsible for the southeastern United States. So North Carolina, South Carolina, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Mississippi. These were all states that I was responsible to advance the president's climate agenda. This includes the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, a $27.5 billion investment that was made under the leadership of the Biden administration to advance everything from the Clean School Bus Program, which was a $5 billion initiative, to water infrastructure around the Southeast United States. Many people don't know that the state of Georgia gets $152 million per year over the next 5 years because of the Biden administration for their water infrastructure. States like Florida get upwards of 270 to 280 million per year for the next 5 years for water infrastructure. So protecting the integrity of these programs as we expand the Savannah port, as we expand the port in Brunswick, as we look at fighting environmental inequities, these are important to know why we must remain committed and vigilant throughout this process. Now, while I may not know all of your occupations, I may not know all of the commitments, what I do know is you wouldn't be on this call on a Sunday when we could all be doing many other things. We have to understand, and I see in the chat, the 5 districts and the inner workings of the Public Service Commission. Now, these 5 districts across the state of Georgia are essentially broken up like congressional districts, but with larger pieces of the pie, because as you can imagine, there are 13 congressional districts and there are only 5 Public Service Commission districts. If you're in, for example, Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton, that's District 3. That is the core of the state of Georgia because of our capital and those areas. But then when you go a little further north, you have District 4 and so on and so forth. And I'm happy to drop a link or to give you guys a map that can be shared with this group so you can see who those individuals are. Now, because of recent court cases, the Public Service Commission originally was argued that because it's a district, they should not be statewide elections. Let me put this into context. In the district that I lived in, and I have fortunately was able to keep dual residency between Fulton and Forsyth County, what has happened is that when I ran for office, for example, I got 2.3 million votes in the state of Georgia. That was a tremendous number of votes. We were able to run, and the end result was that we were able to get both John Ossoff and Reverend Raphael Warnock elected to the United States Senate. But unfortunately, many people didn't go one ballot down and vote for the Public Service Commission race, and that happens very frequently. This year is Christmas because we get 2 Public Service Commission seats in this year and potentially a third. Those 2 seats currently encompass Tim Echols, Fitz Johnson, and then potentially Trisha Pridemore, which is in the Cobb County particular area, and that I believe is District 5. So this year on the ballot will be District 2, District 3, and District 5. Now, again, remember, District 5, where Trisha Pridemore serves, the court has not yet determined if that race will be on the ballot. Now, here's the problem that many people don't realize. The Public Service Commission went into these court hearings over 2.5, 3 years ago. The argument was, if Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton are District 3, why not let Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton vote for their Public Service Commissioner, okay? Now, because of the way the state of Georgia's election rules are set with the Secretary of State, historically, these races have been done on a particular scale that aligns with every constitutional statewide office, which puts it on the ballot as a statewide office. So again, if you're in District 3, it's a statewide election. If you're in District 5, it's a statewide election, and so on and so forth. Now, I apologize to individuals that may know this process, but it paints a picture and puts things into context that can allow us to understand how critical these races are. Now, for every vote, let's just say Georgia Power says, we don't want solar in the state of Georgia. There are 5 votes on the commission. You need 3 votes to get anything passed. So when Georgia Power wants to increase a rate, by which has gone up almost $50 in the past 2 years, $50 is how much your rates have gone up. I want you to think about what that means. To some people, they may say, well, $50 isn't a lot of money. But I argue to a person that's on a fixed income, to a person that is on public transportation, to someone saving money for their kids to go to college or is fighting prescription costs, that $50 that has gone up over time, and this is month to month, has been a tremendous impediment to social progress and to building wealth within an individual's household or within their families. And in fact, the fact that Georgia is amongst a state that individuals are paying almost a third of their paychecks for their utility bills, a third. Now, I want you to think, if you're spending that much money, what does that mean to someone that's on prescription medication, or for someone that is a single mother or a single father that is saving up to send their child to college? Every dime counts. So these programs and these races are critical. Now, until Sonny Perdue was in office in the state of Georgia, there was something called the Public Service Commission Consumer Utility Program, which was in place to allow there to be a body of individual ratepayers that can help to mitigate how Public Service Commission rate hearings were made. Now, this is critical because at one point, Georgia was amongst one of the only states that had a consumer utility committee that allowed individuals to give their feedback and impact on rates going before the Public Service Commission. That was funded at $400,000. Now, recently, legislation has been presented in the last General Assembly in the state of Georgia. Legislation was presented that they return the Consumer Utility Commission to the Public Service Commission. Now, while it didn't pass, I'm surprised that there is now movement for individuals to be able to have a voice. If you follow the money, if you follow where most individuals that run for office checks are coming from, you'll see Southern Company and Georgia Power all over many of the checks that they get. So it's no argument, it's no surprise that many of these individuals are voting straight down the line for everything that comes from Georgia Power. And while our neighbors, our mothers and our fathers, our sons and our daughters are suffering and struggling to pay their bills, Georgia Power shareholders have increased their profitability by over 1,000%. And this is not just due to the expansion of Vogtle 3 and 4. It's not just due to these areas. But when I ran for office, something very surprising happened with the Public Service Commission. I got a lot of Republican support from rural Georgia. Why? Because of coal ash, because of environmental impacts across the state that many of us aren't speaking to that directly impact the individuals and the families in the state of Georgia. So here's what we have to do strategically. Number one, we all know that we have very important elections coming up at midterm, but we cannot look past or beyond the races on the Public Service Commission. In fact, a Democrat has not been elected statewide in Georgia since 2001. I want you to let that sink in. Since 2001, we have not had one Democrat elected in the state of Georgia to a statewide constitutional office over 23 years. And we have to put ourselves in a position to change that. Now, here's the surprising fact about the Public Service Commission. Bobby Baker in 1992 was the first Republican since Reconstruction to be elected to a statewide constitutional office, and he won that by running for the Public Service Commission. I believe the Public Service Commission is one of those organizations, it's one of those body politics that if we focus our time, our attention, our energy, and we commit ourselves daily to making sure we can flip the PSC, it will have a tremendous impact on the midterm elections. And here's the thing, it's also a safeguard to protecting environmental values, environmental justice, and these areas that are seldomly talked about in the state of Georgia. These opportunities for us to be able to address energy burden, for us to address landfills, for us to be able to address the fossil fuel industry and how coal-fired plants have disrupted many parts in Georgia. And what I've heard from many people across the state is it's not just a Democrat or Republican issues. People are tired of their utility bills going up. They're tired of knowing that when they look at an itemized bill, which I'm sure 80% of people, if not more, don't look at an itemized bill, they start trying to figure out where are these fuel recovery costs and Vogtle expansion costs and all these different items on their bills coming from. We don't push back there. And that's why it's important to elect individuals to the Public Service Commission that can help to advance climate policies, protect the integrity of what we're seeing, but also ensure that when a natural disaster comes to the state of Georgia, whether it's in the form of a hurricane or as we currently pray for the folks in California that's dealing with the wildfires, we need to know that if we're paying into a system for utilities, that ratepayers are prioritized. We're not secondhand. We're not any of those areas at all, but we're focused, we're prioritized, we're committed to. And when policies are made at the Public Service Commission in a room full of attorneys from Georgia Power and full of individuals that don't share our interests, our voices matter. We have to make sure that our young people know about the importance of the Public Service Commission. While many people go out and vote for mayor in cities like Atlanta, which will be on the ballot in the municipal elections next year, and many people know about voting for governor and secretary of state and lieutenant governor, most people don't know that arguably the second or third most powerful position in Georgia lies within the Public Service Commission. If you don't know the history of the Public Service Commission, was established as a railroad commission initially, all the way through the 40s and the 50s to now regulate and be the strongest arm of how we regulate utilities, not just with Georgia Power, but with Atlanta Gas Light, with our water, with our infrastructure. These are areas that we can no longer bypass. And I'll share this with you off and outside of our conversation. I believe that this election, unfortunately, was compromised with the re-election of Donald Trump because we forgot to speak to the issues of folks on the ground that were overwhelmingly dealing with economic challenges that I don't believe was any fault of predominantly Democratic-run areas. I believe in the majority of areas where we're seeing these hardships came from a very contentious Congress that then, in turn, when you look at the local level, we saw a tremendous burden on families around the state. We saw a tremendous burden on families around the Southeastern United States because there was a lack of investment in social infrastructure and an overinvestment into areas that had a tremendous financial hardship on these particular communities. Now, I will say this. I am very, very optimistic about the fact that the Public Service Commission 10, 20 years ago was a shadow organization. No one really knew about it. As a matter of fact, people ran for the Public Service Commission to end their careers. They ran because they wanted to get paid a check. Some of them showed up for votes, others didn't. And they basically had a pretty comfortable position just doing the bidding of the utility industry. Well, now more people are aware of it. Now there are organizations that are focused on building consumer protections, on building ratepayers' Bill of Rights and infrastructure that can help to protect vulnerable families. And that's critical. But here's what concerns me. In the midst of all the optimism, we are seeing more challenges, especially with the incoming administration, on how we are going to look at deregulation, and how we're going to look at a moving away from energy infrastructure that's protected disadvantaged communities. When you look at Rockdale County and the recent biolab explosion, for example, what policies are in place for bad actors? And how are we going to continue to push bad actor legislation at the Georgia legislative body to make sure that we protect our most vulnerable communities? These are not just Black and brown communities, these are rural areas. These are areas with every demographic, every age group, every race. And we have to begin to let people know that environmental justice, climate change in these areas, this is about science and not just about Democrats and Republicans. It's about public health. It's about making sure that individuals that can't afford to keep their lights on, when you have programs like LIHEAP, which is the Low Income Heat and Energy Assistance Program, are currently being defunded. So how are we helping our most marginalized brothers and sisters in our community? How are we impacting these communities, and how are we helping to advance policies that are really going to have an integral impact on where we go over the next several years? Now, I'll share 2 or 3 things because I want to make sure that I take any questions that you all may have. But I want to say this. What I think the Biden administration did under the leadership of both President Biden and Vice President Harris, when I administered money throughout the Southeast United States, my office was responsible for roughly $4 to $5 billion. So I would argue that about $4.8 billion went out of my office for climate resilience and infrastructure. This is everything from money for the Savannah port to the climate. We had climate grants that went around the state. We had water infrastructure grants. DeKalb County, for example, received $385 million because they have a growing population, and the demand on infrastructure to support that population has increased. We saw a tremendous investment. Here's why I'm very appreciative of what outgoing President Biden had done. The majority of this money, ladies and gentlemen, is in Republican-run states and in Republican-run districts. And for these individuals to not claim climate, but to take all the climate money, I can guarantee you under a Trump administration, they're not going to be racing to give the money back. So here's the great security that Biden put in place. These individuals are going to have to keep this money. When you look at Hyundai bringing their electric vehicle manufacturing here, you look at Q-Cells, you look at all of the industry that has come to Georgia. Look, 2 or 3 election cycles ago, Republicans were not only the biggest climate deniers, but they didn't want climate money. Now they're taking all the credit for all the electric vehicles, and they're trying to take credit for all the solar, and they're trying to take credit for all these different areas. We can't allow our story, our narrative, and our hard work to fall through the cracks for a lack of us standing up for we know what's most important. The last two things that I'll share, which is critical to the election next year, and then I'll talk about 2026, is why it's important for us to think about not just why we lost in 2024, but to really understand what needs to be done. Number one, we need to build a bench. We need to make sure that we were actively engaging young people at our college campuses and in our communities throughout the state of Georgia. And this is not limited, nor should it be only a commitment to Metro Atlanta. There are many individuals in Rabun County, Georgia, Forsyth County, Georgia, Gwinnett, Albany, Georgia, Chatham County. These areas around our state are very much in need of leadership, are very much in need of coalitions and building strength. Coastal Georgia, rural Georgia, mountainous Georgia. We have an opportunity, whether you live in District 3 or District 2 or not, we have an opportunity to build a coalition that can be what I consider the infrastructure for the 2026 midterm elections. Why? Because we know that the eyes of the country will again be on the state of Georgia, because one of our two U.S. Senators, John Ossoff, will be on the ballot in 2026. And with the current state of the Democratic Party in Georgia, what better way to organize than around energy and infrastructure? What better way to engage rural communities? What better way to address the issues of increased burden on individuals that are trying to save money and an overwhelming impact that utility companies are having on individuals' ability to pay their utility bills? When you have individuals in Middle Georgia and South Georgia and around our state who live in a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment that are paying more than individuals in a 4,000 square foot house, that is a problem. And the energy burden on low and moderate income families has to be addressed. We're not seeing this consistently at the Public Service Commission. We're not seeing this consistently at our legislative body. So I would challenge you all to remind every single voter, every friend, every ally, every person, that in order for us to be successful in 2026, it starts in 2025 with the Public Service Commission. It starts with us making sure we have strong and quality candidates, with us having individuals that not just put their name on a ballot, but that work completely hard and focused on what they need to do across the board, with having the right individuals that understand the importance of the integrated resources plan, that understand the importance of increasing the amount of solar that our utility companies are saying that we should not have in our state, and not just focusing on battery storage or other areas, but making sure that there is solar for all, that there is an opportunity for us to move in a clean and renewable energy direction. So I want to thank you all so much. This is not the last time that you'll see my face. This is not the last time that I will address this body. We're working very hard to determine what this year will look like. I saw in the chat, will I be running? I'm speaking to my family. I have not made a decision or a commitment as of yet, but it is a very, very serious consideration for myself and for my family to make sure that we have a quality candidate for not one, but both races. And I will do everything in my power to ensure that we protect the opportunity for so many of us that built that infrastructure for Senator Ossoff and Senator Warnock in 2020. We kept that momentum, but then we lost our midterms in 2022. I don't know about you guys. I'm tired of losing. I'm tired of having great individuals fighting day and night. I'm looking at many of you on this call. And again, I want to thank, I can't say all your names personally, but I want to thank you for you all as a body, because I know how many doors have been knocked, how many phone numbers have been called, how excited we've been at times. We felt like we finally did it, and only to be hit in our gut and to feel that we put in so much work and now we lose momentum. Our job is not to convince anyone or any organization that we can't be competitive. Our job is not to convince anyone that we're better than the other side. Our responsibility is to make sure to those who we're accountable to on this call, our neighbors, our family members, our friends, our coworkers, even some of those who haven't yet seen the potential in what we can do, we have to commit to pushing policies, to staying the course, and to working in the spirit of Congressman John Lewis, who could have quit after Bloody Sunday in Selma. He could have quit after crossing the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And to the day he died, he was on a picket light. He was protesting. He was advising young people. And he spent every day, every ounce of energy committing himself to the movement, to the struggle, to the cause, but also to the progress of the state of Georgia and to our democracy. So on behalf of my family, I want to say thank you. I will, while I cannot commit to a decision at this moment, I will say that this is a race that I believe can be won in 2025. I don't feel semi-optimistic. I'm not overzealous. I believe that in an off election year, with the right Democratic strategy, with the right commitment on the ground, and with a municipal election in the city of Atlanta that will increase voter turnout in Atlanta with the mayor's race and the state city council races, I believe that there will be a slight edge of Democratic turnout based upon what's coming, and also with the opportunity we have to address our coalition in our state. Thank you all so much for your time and your attentiveness. I'm happy to answer any questions, but it means so much to start the year off with you all and to be encouraged that to see this many faces on a call means that we can win. It means that we have the numbers, we have the excitement. We may be a little frustrated with the result we've gotten recently, but I think that we're right there. Kamala lost this state, ladies and gentlemen, by less than 120,000 votes. We can find 120,000 people to make sure we win the next election. Thank you.
Yeah.
Becky, I saw questions coming up, but I couldn't click. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Karen, would you unmute yourself? She's getting there.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you so much, Daniel. If you have additional questions, please put them in the chat. Daniel, I wanted you to share, you have such a wealth of information and knowledge in your head. I wanted you to share how much organizational influence or times that you're going to speak to help our state Democratic Party as well as our national Democratic Party, which my memory tells me correctly, I think you're on that committee too, to really focus messaging, because those of us that are in a field would really appreciate consistent messaging, to take some of the words that you shared today and put them in succinct fashion so that we could put them out as we're talking to people.
So I think messaging is critical across the board at the state and national level. And here's the challenge. I have run for the Public Service Commission 2 separate times. The first time I got my backside handed to me, I lost very handedly. But we stayed out there and we had a very consistent economic message, and we got 49% of the vote in 2020, and again got over 2.3 million votes. The messaging from the state party and from around the country needs to be more consistent around what these races actually mean. And look, without being negative towards any individual or group, I had very little support in 2020 from the state Democratic Party of Georgia. Look, guys, I'm not a bitter person. I think that there's always room for leadership, and there's room for learning. I think that individuals have been so focused on races like the Secretary of State because we understand the Secretary of State administers and oversees the voting process, right? And business license. People understand the governor's race. They understand mayors. What we've not done is looked at the Public Service Commission as an opportunity to advance education and energy and infrastructure, and to not let climate change be the boogeyman. When I ran for the Public Service Commission, look, I'll tell you what my secret sauce was. You know, we spoke to individuals in areas around the state that grew up playing in creeks that were now polluted by coal ash, right? We spoke to folks with diabetes in areas in rural Georgia where the closest hospital was 40 miles away, and we talked to them about broadband expansion. We've got to do a better job of how we package a message. When we package a message the right way and speak to the issues of a community, and we get people to understand that no matter where they are in our state, they matter, it's very critical. And I think that's a pathway to victory. The more we speak about issues in the state of Georgia that go over people's head and speak at them and not to them, the more people are going to stay at home and be apathetic. Look, we have the numbers right now in Georgia to win. We have the numbers. But when you have 600,000 and 700,000 registered statewide Democratic voters who are staying at home, that is a messaging problem. That is a communications problem. It's not just about putting the door hanger on a door or sending out 1,000 texts to say, donate to my campaign. It's about making sure that in and out of an election season, we're engaging people and we're speaking to them about their light bills. We don't have to complicate the Public Service Commission to speak to people about paying more on their light bills, not being able to save money, and cutting back on what they would like for leisure versus what they have to put in one of the highest energy burden states in the United States.
Okay. Well, I think probably will you be available to guide us on a one-on-one basis on how to make that happen?
The thing I love about this call is that you got to answer, and I want to get invited back. So absolutely, I would be more than happy. I'm going through the chat right now. So it says the campaigning. When will the campaigning for PSC begin? Hopefully with me as the candidate. Thank you so much, Susan, for that. And you all will be amongst the first to know once I make a decision. And here's one of the problems with District 3. Because it was a special appointment seat that was filled by Governor Kemp. If I run for Public Service Commission in 2025, which is likely, I'm not going to say no because I feel very strongly about my chances. The challenge is I would have to run again in 2026 statewide. Because this particular seat that's statewide is to fill the remainder of the term, and then the full term would begin in 2026. So the campaigning would literally have to start in March. Obviously, if there was a decision made before and myself or someone very credible would declare, you could start raising money as early as now. But what I will say is that organizations like this and being able to contribute towards those kinds of campaigns, you all are amongst the first that will be contacted because we have to make sure that we are working consistently across the board. So I hope I answered that one. Another one says,
right. Michael Beach wanted to know, what about the latest push to take on data centers?
So the data centers push is a little complicated because, look, a lot of people, and that goes back to Becky. I think it was Becky that brought up the messaging. Look, here's one of our biggest problems. Most people don't understand the public service within itself, let alone the data center's burden and environmental impact, the correlation therein, right? So I'm not sure how much they are going to take it on because here's the reality, right? I'm just going to tell you guys like it is. The public service commissioners are in the pockets of the utility companies. So they're doing the bidding of these utility companies as they prioritize different things. Now with data centers, what's interesting, I had to regulate one of these issues in Kentucky as a regional administrator because of cryptocurrency, NFTs, and various data centers that were coming up all over the state of Kentucky. And it was causing a tremendous amount of pollution in the state of Kentucky. And we had to literally work at the federal level to come into the state and help them to navigate these burdens. So I'm not sure where the public service stands on that. I know they've recently pushed and opened up a battery storage facility, but with data centers, it's a little more complicated, and I couldn't answer right now where they stand. Now, for me, I'm very much opposed to the lack of regulatory attention that these data centers are getting, and the reason why is because there are studies that actually show the amount of pollution that comes as a result of many of these centers. And that is a part of the messaging and communication side for us to make sure people understand those impacts.
Okay, we have another question. I don't know.
I've got 10, 15 more minutes. So whatever questions you guys have, let me know or just kick me off and I'll still love you. I'll come back.
Okay. I don't know, in this effort, could we partner with Working America to get the word out?
I don't understand the question. Like, can you partner with another organization?
Yeah, I'm assuming that from this thing we can.
Absolutely. I think that is actually a no-brainer because one of the issues with the Public Service Commission, I don't know why my camera went off. One of the issues with the Public Service Commission has been that these strategies have been done in silos. So when you have a lack of coordination, it makes this race harder, right? So I've been contacted, just full transparency, by over 20 organizations, both national and statewide, that are not only asking me to run, but they're asking what coalitions need to be at the table, right? So I think we need to be very intentional about doing three things, right? This is for your organization. Number one, we've got to power map our state. We need to know who our allies are, what organizations exist, because if we run in 2025, you have District 3 and District 2, right? So we need a coalition that touches as many of the 159 counties in Georgia as possible. We can't do this with Metro Atlanta alone, right? So we need to be laser focused on knowing what organizations are there and what resources are available. I saw someone mention earlier about Louisiana where, I think they said something about the race in Louisiana. We need to understand the dynamics of how this race is going to be won. I don't think there will be a problem once we identify the right two Democrats to run. I think Tim Echols is going to be a challenge. Okay, Tim Echols, whether you like him or not, has been very much public facing for a long time around the state of Georgia. When I was the regional administrator, when I launched the Clean School Bus program to help protect the lungs of our children, Tim was at a lot of these events. So around the state of Georgia, Tim has injected himself as this quote unquote social champion, but people don't know his voting record. So it's going to be very challenging for District 2. District 3 in Metro Atlanta is a more winnable seat, but I don't think we can afford to just run a candidate. So it's going to be very important for us to have the coalition. So power mapping, number one. Number two, making sure that people like myself work with you all to come up with a list of 5 to 10 basic talking points. We cannot complicate the Public Service Commission. All right, we got to let people know very simply. Number one, when Plant Vogtle went up, that cost ratepayers over $15 billion. Plain and simple. Instead of shareholders fitting the bill, ratepayers fit the bill, right? Number two, we've got to let people know that Georgia is amongst the most highest energy burden states in the country. That is a technical answer. Here's how you simplify it. About a third of your paycheck goes to paying your light bill every year. When most people realize how much of their paycheck is going to their utility bills versus other states around the country, it's going to tick them off because they're going to start realizing that they could have saved $1,500 or $2,500 a year by having a more integral, I don't know if integrity is a word they use at the PSC, but if they had more integral commissioners, they would be able to save more money. And number three, which I think is most important, the majority of the reason why Kamala Harris lost this last election cycle was for two reasons amongst young people. The first was obviously the war between Israel and Palestine, but secondly was because of young climate activists. So young people that were concerned about Cop City, young people that were concerned about climate policy not reaching underserved communities and disadvantaged areas. We have to bring them back in. All right. We've got the numbers, especially with our 30 and under audience. So 18 to 35-year-olds, they are overwhelmingly loyal on climate issues. The challenge we have is we're not activating them in climate-driven races. So I think that we need to find better ways to engage younger people that are on our campuses, that are in our communities, and that are joining our workforce. Because here's the problem. You take a young person that's at, let's say, South DeKalb High School in DeKalb County. That person goes on to Georgia Tech. They're a climate activist. 4 years later, they're in debt. They may want to continue to be a climate activist, but they got to start paying back their college debt. And then they have to go work for Georgia Power, right? Or they got to go work for Norfolk Southern. We have to give our young people better options to either create careers or to continue to be activists and advocates well after they have left college and they're entering into the workforce. I think that two good things, and forgive me in advance, but I do think that two good things that will come out of the Trump administration is manufacturing and workforce development will go up, right? And here's why I'm saying that. The manufacturing side of what Biden put in place with the Inflation Reduction Act and the bipartisan infrastructure law is contingent on building a green workforce, right? They may not call it a green workforce, but we're going to have to with these electric vehicle manufacturing locations and with all these places that are doing solar. If you haven't visited Q Cells, they show you how they're using AI and technology. These jobs and these skills are going to have to translate to our workforce. So I do think that our Trojan horse approach as Democrats during this administration should be on workforce and manufacturing. That's out of the Public Service Commission purview. But as we look at what our strategy should be, it should be hyper focused on working with our community colleges, our HBCUs, historically Black colleges and universities, but also our colleges that are focused predominantly on science, technology, engineering, and math. Look, I was the first ever senior advisor for STEM in the history of the Environmental Protection Agency. So I was a direct liaison between the White House and the EPA on all STEM careers. And I know that in our country, we are lacking in what they're calling in the federal government the silver tsunami. We're seeing a tremendous retirement of engineers and scientists and chemists, and we're not able to fill those positions at the pace that they're leaving. So I think that we can focus on the clean energy economy by building a core and a base of young people that not only will vote in our favor, but that will fill jobs that I think would advance a just transition. So I hope that answers the question.
Well, thank you, Daniel, so much for spending time with us this afternoon. We will definitely be in touch to
Thank you.
place, many of the ideas that you have shared with us. And I am going to turn this back over to Becky now.
And let me do you guys a favor. I'm gonna give you my email because I trust this group. Okay.
Okay.
If you have my email, I'm gonna give you this email. It's Daniel, Daniel, for spelled out FOR, not the number 4, and then the state of Georgia, GEORGIA. Daniel for Georgia at gmail.com. Now, look, guys, I made that email over 8 years ago, so don't get too excited. I'm still thinking about the next decision, but it is my former campaign email address. It's still very active, and I look forward to hearing with you. Thank you all so much for having me. Thank you for the leadership. Thank you for your work, and thank you so much for helping us be the best part of Georgia. You guys mean the world to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, God, I know that we are all hoping that Daniel for Georgia will be activated as a new campaign Gmail address in 2025. What a fantastic introduction. What a fantastic introduction to the PSC race, and what a great, enthusiastic, and inspiring launch to 2025. So grateful. We have some amazing Democratic leaders, just amazing. So we are now going to pivot a little bit. That was a really wonderful launch into what we're going to talk about next, which is the necessary trouble work this year. Let me share my screen. And let me say that we're going to do this I'm going to start with just a little bit of an overview of what our framework is going to be, kind of generally what the work of necessary trouble is going to be this coming year, and then we're going to shift to doing some actual updates about work currently underway and do some recruiting for assistance from you guys, because the work really does begin now. Let me just share my screen. Okay, so in thinking about this, and let me just say that this framework evolved out of a conversation with all the folks who have been in leadership positions in the last year in necessary trouble. And this is a little bit of a distillation of that work together. And let me also say that necessary trouble, the work we do, we only do because there are folks willing to lead it and do it. So you will, I'm going to kind of lay the groundwork for some recruiting for assistance and some specific places of leadership where we could especially use some help. When we think about the 2025 framework, we're really thinking about 4 categories of work. And again, this is very much with understanding that we are working in the context of a Trump presidency. So it's a little bit different than it has been before. We are number 1. Our focus is going to be on supporting those who are most targeted, particularly in terms of this administration. Number two, we are also going to be focusing on election protection issues. Number three, we are going to be focusing on what we're calling offense, which is kind of long game. It's not so much resistance as it's planning to seed democratic and progressive movement forward over the long term. And finally, we are really committed to continue to support connections within Necessary Trouble and to strengthen Necessary Trouble. Let me do a slightly deeper dive. And let me also say that in all of these categories, we're not going to have to actually organize all the work. There are some of these categories that we will be amplifying the work of other organizations. And then there's some categories where we will be organizing the work. And so we can talk a little bit about both of those. Let's start with supporting those most targeted. The two categories that are extremely imminently threatened in terms of populations, transgender community, especially trans kids, and undocumented immigrants. In terms of immediate global threat, planetary health, right, which Daniel just did an extraordinary introduction for. And keeping in mind that those are kind of most imminent threats, also very vulnerable within this administration, Black and brown communities, refugees and immigrants, people living in poverty, people living in rural areas, low information voters, seniors, women especially of reproductive age, and the whole area of independent journalism. When we think about election protection, these also fall into some discrete buckets. One really crucial area which became especially alarming last year was what's happening, and we'll hear more about this today, with the state election board in particular, and also the DeKalb Board of Registration and Elections. That's one bucket. We will be tracking litigation related to elections, and we will be broadcasting calls to action related to advocacy for election-related legislation that will inevitably be introduced during the upcoming legislative session. And as we get a little further into 2025, we'll be doing our more familiar voter protection work, you know, the hotline and some of the work that many of you did last year. That won't start at the beginning of the year. And then we think about offense, long game. One area that we will absolutely continue to be involved with is supporting the work and efforts of the Fighting 50. For those who are new, you will hear more about this in a little while. Second, municipal elections. And you know what, I realized I don't have the PSC in here, but that should be in here also. Municipal elections, we will be choosing and supporting candidates. For those candidates, we will be canvassing, phone banking, postcarding, fundraising. Our involvement in the PSC will to some extent be determined by who ends up deciding to run. There are some candidates like Daniel who have an infinitely better chance of winning that race. So we'll be talking a lot more about that as candidates put their hats in the race. A third area of volunteer work will be continuing to support the candidate directory. For those who are new, this is a database of all 7,000 races and positions and political positions in Georgia that Necessary Trouble and Partners put together and maintain. And then we're also going to be involved in two somewhat new areas, and we'll be talking more about these as time goes on. We will be finding ways to support democratic networks in more rural counties. One of the things Daniel talked about, and one of the things that when he ran for office, he ran a brilliant campaign because he was active in every corner of the state. And if there's anything that we have learned from this past election, it's that we have to really expand and strengthen democratic networks, not just in the big blue counties, but in some of those more rural, redder counties as well. The second more new initiative is that we are going to be developing and packaging talking points, most immediately and specifically for our partners at DeKalb Dems, but also for however we or others choose to use them. Again, I think that there is a hunger for clear and simple and effective talking points. And finally, we are going to be focusing on connecting and strengthening Necessary Trouble. We will be doing, I hope, more trips to key civil rights sites with troubler Ted Golden and Charles Alphen. You can see the Montgomery Legacy Museum where we went last year. We will be doing more informal gatherings also, and we'll be focusing on beefing up social media presence. So that's the overarching kind of framework. Let me say again that the work only happens when we have people willing to lead it and willing to do it. And if people find that if you are listening to all that and there is nothing that speaks to you, then and you are willing to lead another piece of work, by God, come and we welcome that. We welcome all leadership and all initiative. This next piece of the meeting, we're going to be talking about work that is actually underway and beginning right now, and we could use your help with. We're going to be talking about the State Election Board and the DeKalb Board of Registration and Elections. We're going to be talking about the Fighting 50. We're going to be hearing some updates from our environmental work group. We're going to be hearing updates about transgender youth and ways to support them right now. And we're going to be hearing about a Bloody Sunday Selma Trip anniversary with Ted Golden and Charles Alphen from the Martin Luther King Center. So I would like to turn this over to Janet Grant to talk about the State Election Board. Janet.
Great, thanks, Becky. And glad to see so many folks on the call on this cold day. I want to share with you about these election boards. First of all, just some basic information about what they are, and then about why we think that it's so important for those of us that care about voting rights to be involved in the work of these bodies and advocating with these bodies. First of all, to let you know, I'm not the only person involved here. Michael Beach and I agreed to kind of lead this effort. Karen McGowan agreed to support us, and some of you hopefully got an email from her earlier today in terms of launching some of this. And then there are many others on this call, Pam Woodley, Betsy Shackelford, that have also been really involved with both of these bodies for probably the last more than 6 months, as we've identified concerns with those. So let's go to the next slide, and I want to just give you a little overview about who these bodies are. So first of all, the Georgia State Board of Elections is a body of 5 appointed members. It really has been a strategic focus of Republicans, and in particular election deniers, to change the face of this board over the last 4 years. And they have been successful with the last appointment of Janelle King back in, I think she was appointed in either May or June. Her first meeting was in July. We now have an election board with 3 of the 5 members being truly MAGA election deniers. And that's why you saw so much activity with the State Board of Elections starting in July and going through up until the election, with trying to pass some of their agenda items that were really dictated from their federal partners around changing how elections work in the state of Georgia. So this board has some pretty key responsibilities in terms of promulgating rules and regulations. They conduct investigations when there are complaints or concerns about elections. They refer for prosecution when there are, for instance, fraud situations that are of concern. They are responsible for voter education, and they can recommend legislation. And that's back to Becky's point earlier in terms of coming into the legislative session. There are some things that happened in the State Board of Elections that were struck down by the courts that they're now recommending to the legislature. So we're going to need to really be in tune in order to fight what we expect may be coming out of the legislature that luckily got struck down by courts prior to November. And let's go on to also giving you a little overview on the DeKalb Board of Registration Elections. And we know that there are folks here that don't live in DeKalb, but many of us do. And this is a board that that we can focus on. If you live in another county, I would encourage you to also get involved in attending election meetings in your county. Here in DeKalb, we do have two members appointed by each of the parties, and then the fifth member is appointed by the chief judge based on applications that come in. Luckily for us, the chair, Carly Swift, who was appointed by the judge, is a very reliable Democratic Dem member, and therefore on a lot of problematic issues at the DeKalb board, we see votes that are 3-2. And just because of that one vote, we have been spared some of the worst kinds of proposals that have come out of the GOP members on the board, as well as challenges that have come forward from Republican members here in DeKalb County. So the board has pretty wide-ranging responsibilities in terms of oversight of really everything about elections, the budgeting for it, voter education, where we have polling places, how many early voting sites we have. That's all determined by this board. And more important, or just as important over the last number of years, is they are the ones who adjudicate voter challenges. And we have seen a big uptick in voter challenges here in DeKalb. There is a core group of individuals that attend every meeting. We've gotten to kind of know them by sight and by their comments, etc. And they are hard at work using tools like Eagle AI in order to identify folks that they think should be kicked off the rolls here in DeKalb County and bringing those forward. And in fact, right this minute, we have 5 voter challenges that amount to about 5,000 voters that they want kicked off. And that is going to be on the agenda for their February meeting. Reliably, our 3 members on the board have struck down these kinds of challenges as they've come forward. But it really is an important thing for them to have the support and presence of folks that support them not going forward with those kind of challenges. The other thing I want to note about the DeKalb board is that these positions turn over every 2 years. So all 5 of these roles will be up for a new board members on July the 1st. We know so far that Susan Motter has said she is going to bow out after quite a number of years in this role. So this is something to stay tuned for, and especially for that chair position that's appointed by the judge. We want to make sure that, that is someone who can support election administration. One other note too about DeKalb is that the three members that have been reliably voting are all attorneys. So they really have a good handle, in particular Vasu, who's a voting rights attorney, on what should be allowed based on state and federal law. So then let's talk about what we want to do on the next slide, what we want to do from a Necessary Trouble and DeKalb Dems. We're going to be partnering with DeKalb Dems on this. We want to be advocates and organized advocates at both of these bodies. And that means being there and being willing to comment. There's public comment opportunities at both of these boards, at all of their meetings. And it's important for us to provide a balance to what are comments that are coming from the election denier folks. Sometimes you wonder what world you're living in when you sit and listen to some of these comments. So these are kind of areas that we want to advocate on, certainly providing input on election rules, both on the defense for rules that are, we think, inappropriate, as well as on the offense. We are talking about putting forward our own rules that we would like to see. For instance, Michael Beach has talked about the idea of putting forward a rule that would make it illegal to have election rule changes within 90 days of an election. We also want to continue to oppose voter challenges at the county level, as well as the rules related to it at a state level, providing feedback on polling place changes, access to early voting, absentee voting, which is an area that some of the members on the state board want to overrule. And then in areas like election administration and certification. So we really want to be there to combat this conspiracy theory and misinformation that continues to come forward, really to both boards, and to represent the vast majority of Georgians and counterbalance these election deniers and the large group of, they call themselves the data nerds, the folks that are continuing to say that we've got big problems on our election rolls. And so to do that, on the next slide, we want folks to join us. Many of us have been attending these meetings. You will not be by yourself. We would love to have you join us in person. You can view these online, but it's really important that we have people there in person to counterbalance the large groups that have been attending both these meetings from the other side. The next meeting for the state election board is at the Capitol on February 25th. Actually, they're having a call tomorrow, but it's an executive session. So we're focused on the next meeting on February 25th, and the DeKalb Board of Election meeting, the next one is on February the 13th, and that's where those 5 challenges will be heard. We would love to have you attend if you are willing, or as you get more comfortable, join us in making public comments or submitting written comments. So we already have a list of folks that had indicated interest along the way or have joined us in past meetings. And if you indicated interest, you should have received earlier today a Sign Up Genius invitation. We're trying to get it all organized through Sign Up Genius so that we can communicate with the group easily. And if there are changes in meetings and so forth, and provide more information to you about logistics to attend, etc. If you have not indicated interest and did not receive an email earlier today, please put your name in the chat and we will add you to that invitation. It would be wonderful to see a large group attending both these meetings in order to help us fight this kind of threats that we have related to voting rights in Georgia this year. And with that, I will end it. And
great. Thank you, Janet.
Yep.
Thank you so much. And let me just give huge appreciation to Janet for the work that she's already done with the SCB, along with the other troublers. They have been heroic in being there, in making public comments, They are great mentors. They will take you under their wings and show you how to do it, and it does not have to be intimidating, and you can just attend a time or two before deciding to do the comments. And I would really say that at this moment in time, this is the most crucial work that could be done to keep free and fair elections in Georgia right now. And so if that is of concern to you, this is the work for you. And put your name and email in the chat, and you will get Sign Up Genius, and you will hear from these folks. So thank you to all of you who are already on the list and who are putting your names in the chat. The next project that we are going to hear about is the Fighting 50, and Pam Woodley is going to talk to us a little bit about it. And because I knew we were going to have a number of new folks here, I've asked Pam to not just recruit for support, but also to describe the program a little bit. It has been supremely important. It was one of the most important projects, I think, that happened last year, and we are very committed in continuing to support it. So, Pam Woodley, would you talk about the Fighting 50?
Yes, thank you, Becky. So this really ties in with what Daniel was talking about how the Democrats haven't won a statewide race since 2001. And one of the reasons is because we have tended to only focus on the metro areas and pretty much ignored the rural areas. And we will not win statewide races without losing by less in the rural areas. And I think the Harris campaign made that very clear as well. So the Fighting 50, its mission is to recruit, train, and support Democrats to run for Georgia House in the red districts. And by red, we mean basically unwinnable for Democrats in the short term. So these are districts where the Republicans typically aren't even challenged. They just roll into office term after term. They do nothing to get reelected. They don't even have newsletters for their constituents. Absolutely nothing. They're never challenged. The Democrats that live in those districts feel, abandoned. They don't have their values on their local ballot. They are, uninspired to work for their party because they feel hopeless. So that's where the Fighting 50 comes in. And the way it started is my partner in this, Bob Herndon, and I, we had both volunteered for the DPG for the last couple terms, recruiting for the Georgia House in these districts. And when we went to do it for the 2024 ballot, the first thing we did is call all 40 of the people who had recruited for 2022. Well, only a handful of them were willing to run again. And they said, why would I do that? Nobody cared. Nobody supported me. I never heard from anybody. So this time when we were recruiting for 2024, we told them, oh no, we'll be with you every step of the way. We're going to get you training. We're going to get you donations, blah, blah, blah. But at the time, we had no idea how we would fulfill these promises. So, but we did eventually get some nice big donations together. And so we formed a PAC to handle those donations. And we did, I think, Bob and I were kind of fumbling around this whole time. We had never gone through the qualifying process before, which is what's happening here. We had never done that. We had never done the campaign finance filings that they have to do before. The two of us had worked on a lot of campaigns through Necessary Trouble, is where I got a lot of campaign experience. But as far as actually the nitty gritty of being a candidate, we had no experience, neither did our candidates, but we all really worked through it together. And I think, the most important thing we did is just form them into a really strong community. Even though they're all over the state, we had 42 candidates. And whenever you recruit that many candidates, there's a certain number that are not going to run strong campaigns. They were basically just names on the ballot. So it's really down to about 34 really active candidates in this little community I'm talking about. And so we had a signal group, which was just hopping all the time. They would share things with each other. We had Zoom calls. We arranged training for them. We were able to get them a lot of funding for their campaigns, thanks to some very generous donors. So none of them won, but of course that wasn't expected. That wasn't the point. But the key success factor, our main goal for this first time, was that most of them would run again, and most of them are. So we met that main goal. So what I'd like to ask for volunteers for in the next, during 2025. 2025 will be a recruiting year. We have like 30 candidates, 25, 30 that will run again, but there's like 80 of these red seats in the House. So there's a lot more recruiting we need to do. And so the kinds of work that will involve, and I'd love it if you would put your names in the chat. And I already have the names of lots of you, and lots of you have already helped already. And so you don't need to do it again, occasionally I really need help with like just Microsoft things, like putting PowerPoints together for donors, Word documents for donors. So if people have skills like that, that would be very useful. There's a lot of data and Excel work. Yeah, these are some of our candidates just, out being Democrats in their communities. And I do want to comment, I am just so impressed with these people because they really take risks with their businesses and their personal relationships. Some of them had bad experiences business-wise and so on. So they're doing this for us. They're doing this for Democrats statewide. They know they're not going to win. A lot of them had billboards. The stuff they did this year was just great. The Fab Four is a group of 4 white women up in the Georgia mountains, and 3 of them ran for House and 1 for Senate. So 3 of them are Fighting 50 candidates. And on the right side of the screen there, they arranged flash mobs in Towns County and Rabun County, up in those lakes. They had Democratic flash mobs, which was really cool. So our candidates were all over the state doing stuff like this, canvassing and yard signs, postcards, and troublers. We wrote thousands and thousands of postcards for them. So thank you so much. So back to the type of work we need. In addition to the Microsoft documents, data, Excel work, we will also need some researchers to research potential candidates before we have callers call them. So it would be good. So that will be just strictly computer work, on your own. And then finally, the real prize is people that would be willing to make phone calls. And so we have a process of narrowing down these potential candidates until, we think we're someone that's really serious. And at that point, they generally need a personal call to talk to them about what's involved, which we would provide training for, of course. So it would be great to have people that would do some phone calls as well. So to kind of recap, there's PowerPoints, Word documents, data, Excel work, social media researchers, and phone calls.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, and huge gratitude to Pam and Bob for the Fighting 50, for all that incredible work, and to all the troublers who wrote postcards for those candidates and who worked, some of them coached the candidates on public speaking and helped them create PowerPoint experiences. And I really, really want to encourage folks to put your name and your email in the chat if you are willing to help with this really important project. And it also is really, it's the kind of thing that you can bring your own unique skill set to. So if you are good with internet research, right, you can do that. If you're good at coaching, you can do that. So a lovely, lovely way of bringing kind of the resources in this group to bring to bear on these extraordinary, heroic candidates. And every time a Democrat runs, we win. Every time a Democrat runs, and we don't always win because we win the race. We win because we build the Democratic bench. We bring the issues up. We make the GOP candidate work instead of just, just kind of sliding right in. It is always a benefit. So great gratitude. And thank you very much to those folks who have already been putting their name and email address in the chat for us. Dolly says every time a Democrat runs, an angel gets her wings. You betcha. Love it. Okay, next up, the Environmental Work Group. We are going to be hearing from Michael Beach about the Environmental Work Group, and this is also a really good follow-up to Daniel Blackman. Michael.
Great. Thanks so much, everyone. Again, what I'd like to do is just highlight how we need your help. And that I think we've focused on a few things over the past years. We're a small group with Jane Seward and I kind of co-chairing this, but we want to continue our work with the Okefenokee Swamp, trying to protect it. And I'll mention that a little bit more about that. But also what we need are your thoughts and ideas about other nodes that are important and could be opened up and that you're willing to work on. We don't have, we need people to write letters, speak to legislators, make phone calls, and that sort of thing is generally what we're doing to try and keep this on our legislative agenda as we move forward. So Okefenokee, we're clearly moving forward because we're not finished yet, but also there are other places that could be very important to look at. One of them Daniel talked about, which is this insidious these tax deductions that go to data centers. These data centers are going to places like Georgia because we are going to give them essentially tax breaks and lots of energy and massive amounts of water, which we're in the Chattahoochee Basin, which is the smallest basin for a major metropolitan area. And so just thinking about how do we deal with this so that all that cost for energy doesn't end up back on us as ratepayers. To start with the Okefenokee, we've been working on this for over a year. As many of you know, there is a current mining proposal. The final permit has not been given yet, but this mining proposal is just outside the boundary of the Okefenokee. It used to be an ancient barrier island. So if you dig through that, it makes sense that maybe the water on the other side, which is the Okefenokee Swamp, may not actually stay there. It may leak out. The St. Mary's, the Sewanee that get all their water from the Okefenokee are below the elevation of the Okefenokee. You don't want to breach the dam on the eastern side, but we're still fighting this. Environmental Protection has not given the permit yet, but they've been silent for almost a year. Several 100,000 comments supported turning the mining proposal down. Where we're working to, as Becky said, amplify what we want is working with the Georgia Water Coalition, is a coalition of about 200 different environmental groups. And this is really focusing on how do we protect it for the future? That basically, can we protect all of this barrier island that dams the water into the Okefenokee for the future? And we had a bill come through last year. It's now dead because the 2-year cycle is over, but it was signed by over half the House and could have passed. It died in committee because we have an environmental chairwoman that essentially kills major environmental bills. We want to bring something back in. We're actually meeting as the coalition next week. We're hoping to put a moratorium on mining while we work out how do we get this land? And thank goodness the feds have gotten involved more. U.S. Fish and Wildlife has essentially expanded the potential border for the swamp. And that means that they can now talk to landowners on the within this new border, and that includes the mining site, and potentially acquire mining rights, get a conservation easement. So they're moving forward and trying to somehow compensate these landowners before we actually make the mistake of strip mining through this area. So we're looking forward to that. There's been a lot of silence. Governor Kemp is not a peep, but the AJC really jumped in editorially, lots of articles and full editorials. Speaker Burns all of a sudden was speaking up to say, we're going to try and fix this. We've not heard anything over the summer, but we'll hopefully hear where that might go. But, what we're going to need here is letter writing. Speaker Burns, Governor Kemp, actually, I think Marty Kemp as well. This is a legacy for your husband to leave behind, that he's protected the swamp. And so 2 other things to think about. I mentioned already about, are you interested in the impact of these data centers on our costs and the environmental cost of having these, and actually tax subsidizing them? And the other is another insidious bill that may well come forward, but we need to track and think about, which is that private landowners own the rivers in Georgia, meaning if I want to kayak down the river, that private landowner can prevent me. And there's been a study group with the House. We'll see what they're going to do, but there's been a huge fight over private landowners versus fishermen, hunters, and paddlers that come down the river. And so we want free access for paddlers and fishermen and everything. We don't want to stop that. We want Georgia to be open to that. And so again, mostly about letter writing, thinking about new nodes, helping Jane and I move this forward, and just some passion about how we try and work in a state that is essentially anti-environment, and how we protect, where we've done surveys well over half the state want the Okefenokee protected, and it's in a bipartisan manner, and it's across the state. It's not just about Metro Atlanta. This is basically one single landowner essentially having this House and Senate kind of believing that they should protect the landowner versus give us our national and international UNESCO nominated site intact for future generations. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Michael, and huge gratitude to Michael Beach and also Jane Seward for continuing steadfastly to carry that work, especially related to the Okefenokee. And wonderful that there are folks putting their names in the chat. And if any of you are willing to be even on a list of folks who are just willing to write letters and be on their email list for that, I want to really encourage you to put your name in the chat as well. Super crucial work. Let me also, at this point, turn this over to Robin Shahar to talk to us a little bit about transgender youth.
Hi, everyone. So I have to refocus here. When we met a few weeks ago, some of the leaders, the committee leaders with Necessary Trouble, and we talked about what groups of people need protection, trans youth were right at the top. We are obviously locally focused, and in Georgia, I'm particularly concerned that there will be additional steam to the anti-trans rhetoric from past years, now that that type of bigotry was used in the federal election, and some would say, to help get votes. So this is an election year in Georgia. We anticipate that there will be a number of anti-trans bills coming through the legislature, and also that media advertisements for the upcoming elections in November may have a fair amount of transphobic content as well. What we talked about is there may be some folks who are doing political work, but we were also talking about rolling up our sleeves and supporting people who are suffering through this. Not as a new project that Necessary Trouble will initiate, but supporting organizations that are already out there working with the trans community, particularly trans youth, and seeing if they could use volunteer work. And if so, how can we tap into that? I have had a couple of conversations in the last few days with people in the community, in our Necessary Trouble community, who are familiar with trans support groups in the area, and I'm getting some ideas from them. And if you have ideas and would like to be part of putting together a list and contacting leaders of different groups and seeing how they might welcome use volunteer support in what ways, so that we can get a sense of how we can be most useful. And then once we do that fact gathering, we will then take it a step further about looking at what Necessary Trouble / troublers want to specifically roll up their sleeves and get involved with.
Wonderful. Thank you, Robin. Gareth, thank you for signing on, putting your name in the chat. So if there is anybody who would be interested and willing to put in just a little bit of time in helping to gather information, kind of get the lay of the land of what organizations are doing what in terms of trans community and trans youth, it would be wonderful if you would put your name and email address in the chat to help that happen. I also want to take a moment and do just a little recruiting. Robin has offered to be the kind of point of contact in terms of information. The two most imminently targeted populations are trans community and also undocumented immigrants. We are in sore need of someone or someones who would be willing to be the same as Robin is doing, not necessarily organize a project, but find out information from groups that are already active with undocumented immigrants and see how we can be most helpful either in terms of advocacy or direct support and what that might look like. If you are at all willing to do that, if you are willing to either be the point of contact or co-contact. It's not a big organizing, right? It's being in touch with, so Gareth, thank you. And also, if anybody is willing to be the point of contact or the co-point of contact in the realm of undocumented immigrants, please put your name in the chat. And Gareth, do you have information right? So Tara is saying she is happy to help collect information, but she wants a partner. So we just need a partner. If anybody is willing to partner with Tara, this is when I do my kind of my hawking routine. And if anybody is willing to be Tara's partner, Patrice, I'm going to look at this. There was a call yesterday. Okay, we are getting some volunteers. Thank you so much. Bravissimo. Those of you who have put your name in the chat, we will be in touch with tremendous, tremendous gratitude. Thank you. Yay, team. Okay. And it looks like we actually have a small team of folks, which is even better. That's fantastic. Okie dokie. I am thinking that Ted Golden is not in the house. Is that right, Ted? If you are here under a different name, unmute yourself. Okay, let me speak on behalf of Ted Golden. Ted Golden is our wonderful troubler who is very closely involved with the Martin Luther King Center and is a trained teacher in nonviolent social action. He and his business partner Charles Alphen led a wonderful trip that Necessary Trouble hosted to the Legacy Museum in Montgomery. Actually, it was a year and a half ago. We are hoping to do two things with TED this year, and one of them is we are hoping to do the same thing, is to rent a bus primarily for troublers, to have it be a troubler event, and go to one of the civil rights iconic sites. We don't have concrete plans for that yet. It will be sometime this year. We will keep you posted about that. But very soon, actually in early March, Ted Golden is going to be leading, already has planned and is publicizing a trip commemorating the 60th anniversary of Bloody Sunday in Selma. And Ted is a wonderful troubler, and we are amplifying that, and we will be putting that information in the next update. And if you would like to go, it will be, there will probably be some troublers there. There will be some other folks there. There will be some high school students there. Ted is eager to have troublers join that trip. And so you will be seeing that very soon in the update. And let me say that those of us who have been on, Mary Lou and I went on the Selma trip several years ago. It was extraordinary. And those of us who went to the Legacy Museum with them know that that was also an extraordinary trip. They are incredible leaders. So please keep an eye out for that. And that, for the moment, is what we have. So let me tell you, I am so grateful to see these folks putting their names in the chat for all kinds of things. This is really what democracy looks like. And this is, I think, what we in Necessary Trouble hope to do, is we hope to connect the willingness of people who are willing to kind of put their paddles in the water and work with the work that can be most effective and best suited for them. I want to talk about our next meeting date, and then I want to, for those who are willing to stick around, those troublers who have been to meetings before know we almost always have a song that we play at the end of the meeting. So if you are eager to go, then let me tell you when our next meeting is going to be. And it will be on February 16th. Sunday, February 16th. Our usual meeting date is Sunday, February 9th, but that day is Super Bowl Sunday. So I'm hoping to see everybody. I want to give great appreciation to those folks for whom this is your first meeting. I want to just also lift up again Patrice Hutcherson, for whom this is her first meeting, and she is also running for Atlanta City Council in November, so we will hear more from her. And if you would just give us a little signal if this is your first meeting. Sharon Martinez, thank you. Lenore, thank you. Patrice, thank you. You are all the folks I see on my screen. I know there were others, and those of you, again, such gratitude. Welcome to Necessary Trouble. We love having you. And this is, I think, despite all odds, going to be an extraordinary year. We will work hard, we will have fun, we will sustain and nourish one another. Our two pillars of work that we always talk about is we work really hard and we believe in love. So, on that note, I want to play this song that I really love. And for those of you who have been around a while, hopefully you will remember the group Sweet Honey in the Rock. And so she's going to talk just a little bit. It's after Bernice Regan, but she's going to talk just for a little 30 seconds. And I play this because it feels like it's in the spirit of Necessary Trouble, because this is a year to be creative about our work and to follow our sense of where exactly we need to plug in and what exactly we need to do. Those of you who have been to meetings before know that it sometimes takes me a time or two to really get the video sharing. Be patient with me. It will come. So let me do this. Oh, fantastic. Here we go.
You never quite know when inspiration has occurred or where inspiration comes from. But there are a number of people throughout history who have been very creative, very inventive, and who have created things that we now rely on. But this next song says, do what the Spirit say do. And when it says that, it means if you get a little voice saying, wow, that's a great idea, let me write it down so I won't forget it, because I might write a song based on that, or I might write a book based on the story I just heard, or something just happened in my life that I think other people might be interested in. If you get that kind of inspiration, follow it. Now, sometimes you'll come up with an idea or something that you decide you're going to try to do, and you'll discover someone's already done it first. Well, we've been around on this planet for a long time, so that's not unusual. But your job is to do it better. Take it to the next level. Go someplace with it that no one has ever been before. Do what the Spirit say do. Ready? Children, I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do. I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do. I'm gonna do what the Spirit say do, my Lord. Oh, obey the Spirit of the Lord. I'm gonna walk when the Spirit say walk. I'm gonna walk when the Spirit say walk. I'm gonna walk like John walked into Jerusalem, or walk all around the town. And then I'm gonna shout when the Spirit say shout. Shout out, well, shout when the Spirit say shout. I'm gonna shout like the children at the battle of Jericho. Shout till the walls come down. Then I'm gonna sing when the Spirit say sing. I'm gonna sing when the Spirit say sing. Like Paul Robeson and Aretha Franklin. Say yeah, 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 yeah. Right when the Spirit say write it down. Right when the Spirit say write. Like August Wilson and Zora Neale Hurston gonna sit down and write about it like then I'm gonna speak when the Spirit say speak. I'm gonna speak when the Spirit say speak. Like Martin Luther King and Barack Obama gonna speak out loud and clear. Then I'm gonna dance when the Spirit say dance, dance. Well, dance when the Spirit say dance. Like Judith Jamerson and Baba Chuck Davis gonna dance, 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 dance. Then I'm gonna sit when the Spirit say sit down, John. Sit when the Spirit say sit. I'm gonna sit like dear Miss Rosa Parks. I'm gonna sit down and resist it. I'm gonna stand when the Spirit says stand. Stand up or stand when the Spirit says stand. I'm gonna stand for my rights and for truth and justice. Stand up, stand, stand, stand. And then I'm gonna march when the Spirit says march. March, children, march when the Spirit says march. I'm gonna march like my people from Selma to Montgomery. Gonna march all around the town. Know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna walk, I'm gonna shout, I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna speak, I'm gonna write, I'm gonna read, I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna learn, I'm gonna teach, I'm gonna work, I'm gonna play, I'm gonna read, I'm gonna work, I'm gonna dance, I'm gonna dance, I'm gonna dance, I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna stand, I'm gonna march, I'm gonna do what the Spirit say, do what the Spirit say, do my Lord, do what the Spirit say, do. I'm gonna do, you gotta do what the Spirit say, do well, hey! Lord, don't I know I'm gonna work, I'm gonna work, I'm gonna teach, I'm gonna play, I'm gonna work, I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna dance, I'm gonna shout, I'm gonna preach, I'm gonna pray, I'm gonna do, I'm gonna be, I'm gonna dream, I'm gonna write, I'm gonna sing, I'm gonna shout, I'm gonna work, I'm gonna do what the Spirit say, do what the Spirit say, do my Lord, do what the Spirit say, do. We got to do what the Spirit say, do my Lord, and obey the Spirit of the Lord. Whoa. Do what the Spirit say, do.
So, wasn't that wonderful? Wasn't that worth staying for? Can we just all come off of mute for a moment and just give everybody a huge hooray for all the work that is underway, for all the folks that are here, for all the new folks, for the people who signed up. Thank you so much. Here we go into 2025. Lots of love to everybody.
Thank you, Becky.